What if I told you there's an ancient book that claims to give you a step-by-step guide of exactly what happens when you die? And not just the moment of death, but every single day for 49 days after your heart stops beating. What if this book doesn't just tell you about peaceful white lights and heavenly beings, but also warns you about shape-shifting demons, burning lakes of fire, and beings with animal heads who will try to trick your soul into making the wrong choices? Welcome to Sigil Sanctum. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into ancient mysteries and esoteric knowledge. This isn't some modern near-death experience story or Hollywood fantasy. This is the Bardo Thodol, also known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and it's been around for over 1,000 years. While movies like Doctor Strange have brought this mysterious text into popular culture, people through what they believe is the most important journey of their existence. We're talking about a book so detailed that it tells you exactly which day after death you'll encounter specific types of beings, what colors will surround you, and even what mantras to recite to avoid being reborn as an animal. Let me know about our global community of truth seekers. The book doesn't just say, you'll see a bright light. It describes 42 different peaceful deities that will appear to you, each with their own specific colors, hand positions, and symbolic meanings. It tells you about 58 wrathful, terrifying deities that will chase you through landscapes of fire and blood. It explains how your consciousness will be able to travel anywhere in the universe instantly, opportunity for liberation, and end up being reborn into another life cycle. Studying near-death experiences and DMT, research are starting to find connections between what this ancient book describes and what actually happens in our minds when we're dying. Researchers have found that the brain releases massive amounts of DMT during death, creating vivid hallucinations that match many of the book's descriptions. And why have Tibetan monks been so secretive about its contents for over a millennium? This story begins in 8th century Tibet with a man who changed everything. His name was Padmasambhava, and Tibetans don't just call him a teacher, they call him the second Buddha. But Padmasambhava wasn't your typical spiritual teacher. He was known as a master of magic, someone who could supposedly control demons, fly through the air, and most importantly, travel between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The Tibetans believed he had actually died and come back to life multiple times, giving him first-hand knowledge of what happens after death. But here's where things get really strange. According to the legends, Padmasambhava didn't just write this book and hand it out to people. Instead, he hid it. He buried it in a secret location, claiming that humans weren't ready for this knowledge yet. Why would someone hide a book about death? Well, Padmasambhava believed that this information was so powerful and so detailed that if it fell into the wrong hands, it could be used to manipulate people's fears about death. He also believed that the knowledge would only be truly understood by people who had reached a certain level of spiritual development. The Tibetans have a special word for these hidden texts. They call them terma, which means spiritual treasures. Think of it like a time capsule, but instead of being opened after a certain number of years, these books were supposed to be found only when the world was ready for their secrets. Padmasambhava supposedly hid hundreds of these texts throughout Tibet, each one containing knowledge that would be needed at different points in human history. The Bardo Thodol was considered one of the most important of these hidden treasures because it dealt with the one experience that every human being must face: death. Fast forward 600 years to the 14th century, a man named Karma Lingpa claimed he had a vision that led him to a cave on Gampo Mountain in Tibet. This wasn't just any cave. It was located in one of the most remote and dangerous parts of the Himalayas, a place where few people dared to travel. Inside this cave, hidden beneath rocks and protected by what the Tibetans believed were spiritual guardians, Karma Lingpa found the text that Padmasambhava had concealed centuries earlier. Now, you might think this sounds like a convenient story, but here's what makes it credible. The book that Karma Lingpa discovered was unlike anything that existed in his time. It contained knowledge about the mind and consciousness that wouldn't appear in Western science for another 500 years. The text describes states of consciousness, brain functions during death, and psychological processes that 14th century Tibet had no scientific framework to understand. Yet somehow, which is the Tibetan word for in-between states. But these aren't just abstract concepts, they're detailed maps of consciousness. But even this isn't simple. The book explains that during life, we experience many deaths every day when we fall asleep, every time we lose consciousness, every time we're so absorbed in something that we forget ourselves. It says that learning to recognize these small deaths is practice for the big one. The second bardo is the actual process of dying, those moments when your body is shutting down but your consciousness is still active. The book describes this in incredible detail, explaining the physical sensations you'll experience, the sequence in which your senses will shut down, and the mental states you'll go through. It even explains that there's a moment they call, but hasn't yet entered the after-death state. This moment, according to the book, is the greatest opportunity for spiritual liberation that any human being can experience. The third bardo is the most detailed. It's the 49 days after death, when your consciousness travels through different realms before deciding what happens next. But here's the thing. The book doesn't describe this as a passive experience where things just happen to you. Instead, it's an active journey where your consciousness has to make choices, solve problems, and navigate challenges. It's like a video game where your spiritual development during life determines what level you start at and what abilities you have. But here's what most people don't know about this book. It wasn't written for casual reading. In Tibetan culture, this text is so sacred that monks spend years memorizing it word for word, containing thousands of mantras, prayers, and detailed descriptions. Someone is dying. These monks sit beside them and whisper the instructions directly into their ears, guiding them through each stage of death like a spiritual GPS system. The process is incredibly precise. The monks know exactly which passages to recite on which days after death. They know which mantras to use for different types of people. There are different instructions for someone who lived a spiritual life versus someone who lived a worldly life. There are even different instructions based on how the person died, sudden death versus long illness. Over the past 600 years, Tibetan monks estimate they've used this book to guide more than 100,000 people through their death process. Now, you might be wondering what this legendary book actually looks like. The original manuscripts of the Bardo Thodol aren't your typical paperback books you'd find in a bookstore. These are handwritten texts on paper, made from the bark of Daphne plants, which grow high in the Himalayan mountains. The process of making this paper alone takes months. The bark has to be harvested at specific times of the year, soaked in mountain streams, beaten by hand, and dried in the thin mountain air. The Tibetans believed that using this special paper would help preserve the spiritual power of the words written on it. The writing itself is done in what's called the Tibetan script, using ink made from crushed minerals and gold. Yes, actual gold. The most important mantras and deity descriptions are often written in gold ink because the Tibetans believed that gold held spiritual energy that would help guide souls through the death process. The pages are bound between wooden covers, usually made from juniper wood, which is considered sacred in Tibetan culture. These covers are then wrapped in silk cloth, deep red, and gold, colors that represent the transformation of consciousness from one state to another. But here's what makes these books really special. They're not just text. The margins are filled with detailed drawings of the deities and demons described in the book. We're talking about incredibly intricate artwork showing beings with multiple arms, different colored skin, elaborate headdresses, and symbolic objects in their hands. Each deity has specific colors, facial expressions, and body positions that have deep meaning. For example, peaceful deities are usually shown in meditation poses with calm faces, while wrathful deities are depicted with bulging eyes, fangs, and surrounded by flames. The book also contains what are called mandalas, circular diagrams, that serve as maps of the different realms that consciousness travels through after death. These aren't just pretty pictures. Each mandala is like a detailed floor plan of a spiritual dimension, showing where different types of beings live, what the landscape looks like, and how to navigate from one area to another. Some of these mandalas are so complex that they contain hundreds of tiny details. Mountains, rivers, palaces, and beings that you need a magnifying glass to see clearly. What's really interesting is how people react when they're in the presence of an authentic Bardo Thodol manuscript. Tibetan monks report that these books seem to have their own energy. People often describe feeling both comforted and slightly unsettled when they're near one of these texts. Some say they feel like the book is somehow aware of them, which might Sounds strange until you consider that the Tibetans believe these books exist partially in the spiritual realm they describe. There are very specific rules about how to handle these manuscripts. You can't just casually flip through one like you would a regular book. First, you have to purify yourself, wash your hands, burn incense, and recite specific prayers. The book should never touch the ground, and it should always be kept in a high, clean place when not in use. Many families keep their copy wrapped in multiple layers of silk and stored in a special shrine room. When the book is brought out for use, it's treated with the same respect you might show to a living spiritual teacher. The really fascinating thing is that no two manuscripts are exactly identical. Since each one is hand-copied, the monks who create them often add their own marginal notes, additional prayers, or slightly different versions of certain sections. Some manuscripts include extra chapters with local variations of the death rituals. Others have additional deity descriptions that were added based on the copying monk's own spiritual visions. This means that each Bardo Thodol manuscript is unique, like a personalized guide to death that's been shaped by the spiritual experiences of everyone who has worked on it. So what exactly can this book do? According to Tibetan tradition, the Bardo Thodol doesn't just describe what happens after death, it actually has the power to change what happens to you. Think of it as the ultimate cheat code for the afterlife. But unlike a video game cheat code, this one requires years of preparation and practice to actually work. The book's most important power is what the Tibetans call liberation through hearing. This means that even if you've never read the book while you are alive, if someone recites the right passages to you after you die, you can still achieve enlightenment. This is why Tibetan monks will sit with a dead body for hours, reading specific sections of the book out loud. They believe that the consciousness of the dead person can still hear and understand these instructions for up to 49 days after death. But here's where it gets really specific. The book contains detailed instructions for recognizing what it calls the clear light of death, the moment when your consciousness separates from your physical body. According to the text, this moment offers the greatest opportunity for spiritual liberation that a human being can ever experience. If you can recognize this clear light and merge with it, you bypass the entire 49-day journey through the Bardo realms and achieve immediate enlightenment. But here's the catch. This moment only lasts for an instant, and most people are so confused and disoriented by dying that they miss it completely. For those who miss this first opportunity, the book provides navigation instructions for the Bardo realms. These aren't just general guidelines like follow the light. The book tells you exactly what you'll encounter on each day after death. On the first day, you'll meet Vairocana, a blue-colored Buddha surrounded by white light. If you can recognize him and merge with his light, you achieve liberation. If not, you move to day 2, where you'll encounter Aksobia, another Buddha figure, this time blue and surrounded by blue light. The book continues like this for weeks, describing different Buddhas, colors, and opportunities for liberation. But what if you're not ready for liberation? The book also teaches you how to get a good rebirth instead of a bad one. It explains how to recognize the signs that indicate where you might be reborn if you see certain colors or feel drawn to certain places. You might be heading toward rebirth as an animal. If you see other signs, you might be heading toward rebirth as a human in a good family. The book gives you techniques for avoiding the bad rebirths and steering toward the good ones. One of the most practical powers the book claims to offer is the ability to help people who are still alive. Family members can perform specific rituals described in the book to assist their deceased relatives during the Bardo journey. These rituals involve making offerings, reciting prayers, and visualizing the dead person receiving help from enlightened beings. The Tibetans believe that these actions can actually change the experience of someone who has already died, potentially helping them achieve a better rebirth or even liberation. The book also contains what are essentially passwords for the afterlife. It teaches specific mantras, sacred sound formulas that are supposed to protect you from the terrifying beings you'll encounter in the Bardo realms. For example, there's a mantra you're supposed to recite when you encounter the wrathful deities that chase you through burning landscapes. Another mantra is designed to help you remember your spiritual training when you're confused and disoriented after death. But here's the really interesting part. The book claims that these powers aren't just for after you die. It teaches meditation techniques that allow you to practice dying while you're still alive. Advanced practitioners learn to enter states of consciousness that simulate the death experience, allowing them to familiarize themselves with the Bardo realms before they actually die. Some Tibetan masters claim they can enter these death-like states at will, traveling through the Bardo realms and returning with information about what they've seen. The book also works with what the Tibetans call spiritual protectors, enlightened beings who appear during the Bardo journey to help guide consciousness through the various challenges. These aren't just abstract concepts. The book describes these protectors in detail, what they look like, how they'll approach you, and what kind of help they can provide. Some protectors specialize in helping people recognize liberation opportunities. Others focus on protecting souls from negative influences during the Bardo journey. However, the book comes with serious warnings about the requirements for accessing these powers. You can't just read it once and expect it to work. Tibetan tradition requires years of preparation, meditation practice, ethical living, and study with qualified teachers. The book explicitly states that if you haven't prepared properly during life, most of its instructions will be useless to you after death, because you won't have the mental stability or spiritual development. But what if we step back from the literal descriptions and look at what this book might really be telling us about the human experience? Many scholars and psychologists believe that the Bardo Thodal isn't just a guide for what happens after physical death. It's actually a sophisticated map of human consciousness itself. Think about it this way. The 3 Bardos described in the book perfectly mirror the cycles we go through every day. The Bardo of life represents our normal waking consciousness. When we're caught up in our daily routines, relationships, and concerns, the Bardo of dying represents those moments when our normal sense of self breaks down during deep sleep. Under anesthesia, in moments of extreme stress or trauma, or when we're so absorbed in something that we lose track of time and forget ourselves, the Bardo after death represents the unconscious mind, that vast realm of dreams, memories, and psychological patterns that we usually aren't aware of but that powerfully influences our behavior. From this perspective, the 42 peaceful deities and 58 wrathful deities that appear in the Bardo aren't supernatural beings at all. They're representations of different aspects of our own psychology. The peaceful deities represent our positive potential, wisdom, compassion, clarity, and inner peace. The wrathful deities represent our fears, anger, attachments, and destructive patterns. The journey through the Bardo realms becomes a symbolic representation of what happens when we're forced to confront all the parts of ourselves that we usually keep hidden or suppressed. This interpretation helps explain why the book emphasizes that all the beings you encounter are projections of your own mind. According to the text, nothing you experience in the Bardo realms has independent existence. It's all created by your own consciousness. This is remarkably similar to what modern psychology tells us about dreams, hallucinations, and altered states of consciousness. Everything we experience is filtered through our own mental patterns, beliefs, and expectations. The 49-day journey can be seen as representing the process of psychological transformation that happens when we're forced to let go of our normal identity. In real life, this might happen during major life transitions: the death of a loved one, the end of a marriage, losing a job, or facing a serious illness. During these times, our normal sense of who we are breaks down, and we're forced to confront deeper questions about our identity and what really matters to us. The book's emphasis on recognizing the clear light of death can be interpreted as learning to recognize moments of pure awareness, those brief instants when our normal mental chatter stops and we experience consciousness without any content. Meditation practitioners often describe similar experiences, and psychologists have found that people who regularly experience these states tend to have better mental health and less fear of death. But here's where the book's symbolic interpretation becomes really profound. It suggests that what we call death is actually just an extreme version of processes that are happening in our minds all the time. Every night when we fall asleep, our normal sense of self dies and is reborn when we wake up. Every time we have a powerful dream, we experience a kind of Bardo state where our consciousness creates vivid experiences that feel completely real until we wake up. The book warns about the dangers of attachment and fear during the Bardo journey, and this maps perfectly onto psychological insights about how our attachments and fears trap us in limiting patterns of behavior. Just as the book describes souls being reborn based on their karmic patterns, modern psychology recognizes how our unconscious beliefs and emotional patterns tend to recreate the same kinds of experiences over and over in our lives. The terrifying chase scenes described in the book, where wrathful deities pursue souls through burning landscapes, can be seen as symbolic representations of what happens when we're forced to confront our own psychological shadows, the parts of ourselves we've rejected or denied. Anyone who has been through therapy, addiction recovery, or serious spiritual practice knows how terrifying it can be to face these hidden aspects of ourselves. Even the book's instructions about choosing your next rebirth can be interpreted symbolically as advice about how to consciously create positive change in your life. Instead of being unconsciously driven by old patterns, the book teaches awareness and choice, the ability to recognize what's happening in your mind and make conscious decisions about how to respond. Now, here's where things get really interesting. This ancient Tibetan book about death has found its way into some of the most popular movies and TV shows of our time, and the connections are more profound than you might think. Let's start with one of the most mind-bending films ever made, Christopher Nolan's Inception. On the surface, Inception is about a team of thieves who enter people's dreams to steal secrets. But when you understand the Bardo Thotl, you realize that Nolan created what is essentially a modern retelling of the ancient Tibetan death journey. Think about it. In both stories, consciousness travels through multiple levels of reality. Time moves differently in each level, and the biggest danger is getting lost and unable to return to normal awareness. In Inception, Dom Cobb and his team use a device to enter shared dream states that have multiple layers. Dreams within dreams within dreams. The deeper you go, the slower time moves, and the more unstable reality becomes. This is almost identical to what the Bardo Thotl describes. About the different levels of the Bardo realms, the book explains that consciousness after death travels through increasingly subtle and strange dimensions, where time doesn't work the same way as in normal life, and where it's easy to become confused about what's real and what's projection. Here's where the parallel becomes really striking in Inception. There's a place called limbo, described as unconstructed dream space, where people who die in the deep dream levels end up trapped. Limbo is presented as a kind of raw consciousness realm, where anything can be created by the mind, but where most people become lost in their own projections and forget their dreaming. The Bardo Thotl describes something remarkably similar. Realms where consciousness becomes trapped in its own mental creations. Unable to distinguish between what's real and what's self-generated illusion, the movie's central tragedy revolves around Cobb's wife, Mal, who spent so much time in limbo that she became convinced that regular reality was actually a dream. When they returned to the waking world, she killed herself because she believed it was the only way to wake up to true reality. This perfectly mirrors one of the key warnings in the Bardo Thotl, that consciousness can become so attached to the experiences in the Bardo realms that it refuses to let go and move forward, becoming trapped in intermediate states between life and death. Even the movie's famous spinning top, Cobb's totem that tells him whether he's dreaming or awake, has a parallel in the Tibetan book. The Bardo Thotl emphasizes the crucial importance of maintaining awareness and not being fooled by the incredibly realistic experiences that consciousness creates during the death journey. Just as Cobb needs his totem to stay grounded in reality, the book teaches specific techniques for maintaining awareness that you're in the Bardo state and not being deceived by what you're experiencing. The film's exploration of how memory, guilt, and emotional attachments can trap consciousness in dream states directly echoes the Bardo Thotl's teachings about how karmic patterns and mental attachments determine what kinds of experiences you have after death, and whether you can achieve liberation or become trapped in cycles of rebirth. But Inception isn't the only modern work that draws from these ancient teachings. The Netflix series The OA takes an even more direct approach to exploring consciousness, death, and what lies beyond. The show's premise involves a woman who has multiple near-death experiences and claims to have learned movements and techniques that can help consciousness travel between dimensions. This is essentially what the Bardo Thotl teaches, that there are specific practices and knowledge that can help consciousness navigate non-physical realms. Even more mainstream examples show this influence. The Marvel movie Doctor Strange features the Ancient One teaching Stephen Strange about different dimensions and levels of reality, warning him about the dangers of getting lost in alternate realms of consciousness. The film's depiction of the mirror dimension, a place that reflects normal reality but operates by different rules, is very similar to how the Bardo Thuddle describes the intermediate realms after death. What's fascinating is that many of these modern works were created by people who may have never directly studied the Bardo Thuddle, yet they're exploring the same fundamental questions about consciousness, reality, and what happens when our normal sense of self breaks down. This suggests that these ancient Tibetan insights about the nature of mind and death tap into something universal about human experience. The popularity of these themes in modern entertainment also reflects our culture's growing fascination with consciousness research. Scientists studying psychedelic experiences, near-death experiences, and altered states of consciousness are finding remarkable parallels to what the Bardo Thuddle described over 1,000 years ago. Research with substances like DMT and psilocybin is revealing that consciousness can indeed experience vivid, apparently independent realities that feel more real than normal waking life, exactly what the book describes happening during the death journey. What these modern interpretations often miss, however, is the Bardo Thuddle's emphasis on preparation and spiritual development. Movies like Inception present entering these alternate states of consciousness as something that can be done with the right technology. But the Tibetan book makes it clear that navigating these realms successfully requires years of mental training, ethical development, and spiritual preparation. Without this foundation, consciousness becomes lost and confused in its own projections, exactly like what happens to many characters in these modern stories. So what does this ancient book really tell us about the greatest mystery that every human being faces? Whether you interpret the Bardo Thuddle literally as a guide to what happens after physical death, or symbolically as a map of human consciousness, its core message is both profound and surprisingly practical. The book suggests that what we call reality is far more fluid and malleable than we usually believe. Our normal waking consciousness is just one possible state of awareness, and there are many others that we can access through meditation, dreams, or extreme life experiences. More importantly, the book teaches that consciousness itself is indestructible. It may change form, it may have different kinds of experiences, but the basic awareness that makes you you continues regardless of what happens to your physical body. But here's what makes the Bardo Thuddle more than just philosophical speculation. It provides practical techniques for working with consciousness. During times of major transition and change, even if you never experience the literal death journey it describes, you will face times in your life when your normal sense of identity breaks down. You'll experience loss, trauma, major life changes, or moments when you question everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world. The book's teachings about maintaining awareness during confusion, not being attached to temporary experiences, and recognizing the projections of your own mind can be incredibly valuable during these times. Its emphasis on preparation, developing mental stability, ethical behavior, and spiritual understanding before you need them is advice that applies to any major challenge in life. Perhaps most importantly, the Bardo Thuddle offers a radically different perspective on death than what most of us grew up with. Instead of death being a terrifying unknown or a final ending, the book presents it as the ultimate adventure, a journey through realms of consciousness that most people never imagine exist. This perspective can completely transform how we live, because when you're not afraid of death, you're free to take risks, pursue your deepest purposes, and love more fully. The book also challenges our culture's materialistic assumptions about consciousness. While modern science treats awareness as something produced by the brain, the Bardo Thuddle suggests that consciousness is fundamental to reality itself, more basic than matter or energy. From this perspective, the brain doesn't create consciousness. It focuses and channels consciousness, like a radio receiving signals from a much larger field of awareness. This has profound implications for how we understand ourselves and our relationships with others. If consciousness is truly indestructible and interconnected, then death becomes not an ending but a transformation, and every person we meet is a temporary manifestation of the same fundamental awareness that we are. The Bardo Thuddle reminds us that consciousness itself might be the only thing that's truly permanent in a world where everything else is constantly changing. Whether you're drawn to its literal teachings about navigating death or its symbolic insights about working with your own mind, this ancient book offers profound wisdom for anyone willing to explore the deeper mysteries of existence. If you found this journey through the Tibetan Book of the Dead as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Sigil Sanctum. We're building a community of people who aren't satisfied with surface-level explanations of life's biggest mysteries. We dig deep into the ancient wisdom traditions, esoteric texts, and hidden knowledge that can transform how we understand reality itself. Coming up on the channel, we'll be exploring more of these incredible texts that claim to reveal what lies beyond the veil of ordinary consciousness. We'll dive into the Egyptian Book of the Dead and see how different cultures mapped the journey after death. We'll examine the Gnostic Gospels and their radical teachings about the nature of reality, and we'll investigate modern research into consciousness that's confirming what these ancient texts described thousands of years ago. The ancients knew things about consciousness, death, and the nature of reality that we're only beginning to rediscover. Each of these texts is like a key that can unlock new levels of understanding about who we really are and what we're capable of. So, stay curious, stay open to possibilities that might challenge everything you thought you knew. And remember, the greatest adventures might be the ones that happen in consciousness itself. Until next time, this has been Sigil Sanctum, your guide to the mysteries that lie hidden in plain sight. Keep seeking the truth. And I'll see you in the next exploration of the ancient wisdom that can change how we see everything. The original Bardo Thodol exists as a collection of ancient Tibetan manuscripts written in the distinctive Dbyukan script on traditional paper made from the bark of the Daphne plant. These texts are bound between wooden covers, often wrapped in silk brocade of deep burgundy and gold colors that symbolize the transformation of consciousness. What makes these manuscripts particularly striking is their paradoxical nature. Appear deceptively simple, yet contain some of the most complex descriptions of consciousness ever recorded. The pages are filled with detailed mandalas and symbolic diagrams that serve as maps of the Bardo realms, alongside mantras written in Sanskrit that are said to guide the consciousness through specific stages of death. The presence of an authentic Bardo Thodol is announced through its distinctive energy. Practitioners report feeling a profound sense of both comfort and unease when in its presence, as if the book itself exists partially in the realm it describes. Traditional protocol requires that the text be approached with specific purification rituals, and it should never be read casually only during times of spiritual preparation or in guiding someone through death. The significance of these physical attributes extends beyond mere symbolism. The very act of creating these manuscripts was considered a spiritual practice, with each character inscribed as a form of meditation on the nature of impermanence. The Bardo Thodol's most remarkable ability lies in its claim to navigate consciousness through the 49-day journey after death. According to the text, it can teach the dying person to recognize the clear light of death, the moment when pure consciousness is revealed without the filter of physical existence. The book provides 5 specific powers for those who study it. Liberation, through recognition, the ability to achieve enlightenment at the moment of death. By recognizing the nature of mind itself, navigation of the Bardo realms. Detailed instructions for traversing the intermediate states between death and rebirth, including how to avoid terrifying visions and negative rebirths. Communication with the deceased guidelines for the living to assist souls who have died, creating a bridge between worlds. Through specific recitations and visualizations, preparation for conscious death. Techniques for maintaining awareness during the dying process, preventing the unconscious drift that leads to unfavorable rebirths. Karmic transformation. Methods for transforming negative karma even after death, offering opportunities for spiritual advancement in the Bardo states. The text requires intensive study during life to be effective. Casual reading provides little benefits. Practitioners must undergo years of meditation training to develop the mental stability necessary to apply its teachings during the chaos of death. The book works in conjunction with spiritual protectors and guides, enlightened beings who appear during the Bardo journey to assist the consciousness. These include the 100 peaceful and wrathful deities, each representing different aspects of enlightened awareness that manifest during the death process. Beyond its literal instructions for navigating death, the Bardo Thotl represents humanity's deepest attempts to understand the nature of consciousness itself. The three Bardos symbolize the archetypal journey that every human must face, the cycles of unconsciousness, awakening, and transformation that define not just death, but every moment of existence. The book parallels the hero's journey found in mythology worldwide, the soul's descent into the underworld, confrontation with terrifying forces, and potential return transformed. Psychologically, the Bardo visions represent the projection of our own mental states, our fears, attachments, and karmic patterns made manifest in the realm between worlds. The 49-day journey symbolizes the 7-week gestation period of consciousness itself, reflecting how awareness develops and transforms. The terrifying deities that appear represent our own suppressed emotions and unconscious fears, while the peaceful deities embody our potential for wisdom and compassion. However, the text warns of profound dangers, the temptation to cling to familiar forms of existence, the seduction of ego-gratifying visions, and the terror of facing ultimate reality. Those who misunderstand its teachings risk becoming trapped in intermediate states, neither fully alive nor properly dead, existing in a liminal space of spiritual confusion. The Bardo Thotl has found remarkable resonance in contemporary Western culture, particularly through its influence on psychedelic research and near-death experience studies. Dr. Timothy Leary's groundbreaking work, The Psychedelic Experience, directly adapted the Bardo Thotl as a guide for LSD trips. Recognizing parallel between the death journey and altered states of consciousness, modern neuroscientists like Dr. Eben Alexander and Dr. Sam Parnia have found striking correlations between near-death experiences and the Bardo descriptions. Their research suggests that consciousness may indeed continue during clinical death, experiencing visions and encounters that mirror the text's ancient descriptions. The book's influence appears prominently in films, like Christopher Nolan's Inception, where the concept of liminal dream states and levels of consciousness directly echo Bardo teachings. The film's exploration of mental projections, time distortion, and the danger of becoming lost between realities serves as a modern interpretation of the Bardo journey. In Inception, Dom Cobb's journey through dream levels mirrors the soul's descent through Bardo realms. The spinning totem represents the need for anchoring awareness, similar to how the Bardo Thotl emphasizes maintaining recognition of the mind's true nature. The film's central tragedy, Cobb's wife, Mal, becoming convinced that reality is a dream, reflects the text's warning about becoming attached to illusory experiences during the intermediate states. The movie's climactic scenes in limbo directly parallel the Bardo descriptions of consciousness becoming trapped in formless void states. Like the Tibetan text, Inception suggests that memory, guilt, and attachment become the primary obstacles to liberation, manifesting as seemingly external threats that are actually projections of the mind itself. The film's exploration of shared consciousness and the ability to influence another person's mental state mirrors the Bardo Thotl's instructions for the living to assist the dead through the Bardo journey. Both suggest that consciousness is not as individual or isolated as Western thought typically assumes. This narrative connects to the broader human experience of facing our own mortality and the question of whether anything of our identity survives death. The Bardo Thotl, like Inception, suggests that consciousness is more fluid and malleable than we imagine, capable of creating entire worlds of experience that feel completely real. The enduring power of the Bardo Thotl lies not just in its claims about death, but in its revolutionary understanding of consciousness itself. This ancient text suggests that awareness is the fundamental reality more basic than matter, energy, or even life itself. The book confronts us with perhaps the most essential human question: what remains when everything we identify with disappears? According to its teachings, beneath all our thoughts, emotions, memories, and physical sensations lies an indestructible awareness that neither lives nor dies, but simply is. Yet the text warns us that this recognition requires tremendous courage and preparation. Most of us spend our lives so identified with temporary phenomena, our roles, our relationships, our physical bodies, that when death strips these away, we panic and grasp for familiar forms of existence, missing the opportunity for true liberation. Bardo Thodol suggests that every moment of life is practice for death each time we fall asleep. Each time we lose ourselves in dreams or meditation, we rehearse the great transition that awaits us all. In this view, consciousness is not produced by the brain, but rather expressed through it, and death is simply a change in the mode of expression. Whether you view the Bardo Thodol as literal truth or profound metaphor, its teachings invite us to examine our own relationship with consciousness and mortality. If you found this exploration of the mysteries between life and death as fascinating as I did, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We'll continue diving deep into ancient wisdom, texts that challenge our understanding of reality, from the Egyptian Book of the Dead to the mystical experiences recorded in the Dead Sea Scrolls. These texts offer glimpses into humanity's most profound questions about existence, consciousness, and what lies beyond. Until next time, remember that awareness itself may be the only thing that truly survives. Everything else is just a story we tell ourselves about who we think we are. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next exploration of the mysteries that lie beyond the veil.